in order to emphasize the physical and the mental being one, see, the word, many scientists have introduced the word psychosomatic now, meaning mind and body, right? Psyche is mind and soma is body. Now, that, however, has the tendency to produce a fragmentary meaning of saying mind is one thing, matter is another, and they're sort of different things, and they meet at the boundary somewhere in interaction. Now, I wanted to introduce another way. See, suppose we say here is something material, it has a form, and this form means something to us, right? And maybe it means a chair, or it means a certain material, it means a certain color, a certain strength, all sorts of meanings, right? According to our past experience and according to what we now perceive. And it has a significance, right? Now, so I'm saying I'm going to generalize the idea of matter and call all matter soma in order to not make a division of the body from the rest of the world, right? The word soma, the way it's used now, it takes just simply the matter of the body, which gives the matter of the body a very great difference from every other form. But in fact, we know there's no great difference. It's constantly exchanging. You see, what was food, what was air, what was water becomes the body, and vice versa. So therefore, and it's also exchanging all the time. So I call the one field of matter, call it soma. And now I'm saying the soma, whatever it is, whether in the body or outside, is significant, right? See, so this soma-significance is the word I use for that. Now then, but it works the other way around. The significance works in matter, you see. If we say, we gave the example of the shadow and the dark night, the significance worked in the whole body and the chemistry and the neurophysiology and the action, right? So you say there's a two-way flow. The soma becomes significant. The significance becomes somatic, right? It unfolds. The meaning is unfolded in matter in the whole body. I call that signa somatic. Soma significant, signa somatic, right? It's two-way flow, right? And therefore, it's all one process. Now, we're not making a distinction of mind and matter, but we are going to say that at each stage you have this distinction. It's more like the distinction of north and south, which is present everywhere. It's not that north is one thing and south is another, or the form and the content, right? So the idea then is that this happens on many levels of subtlety. You see, the word hormone, for example, that's a Greek word meaning messenger, carrying a meaning, right? In other words, if there is danger, the hormones or whatever will carry the message of mobilizing the body to do something about the danger. It carries the message to the various parts of the body which are relevant. See, the chemicals act as messengers. So we could say they're part of the meaning. They're a little bit like letters carrying messages. The letter is of no significance in itself. It's what's written on it that counts the meaning, right? And that idea has been developed by modern biologists, by molecular biologists, when they talk about the DNA molecule. The DNA molecule is supposed to be a code, that is to say a language, a tremendously complex molecule in all its parts. Now you could say it has, then they say there's RNA, which carries messengers, it carries messages from parts of the DNA to various sites in the cell where proteins are made. The message tells those sites to make certain proteins instead of others. So it organizes the activity of the cell so that according to the DNA you will produce this kind of cell or that kind of cell or another kind, right? It all depends. So the information in the DNA determines the nature of the cell according to this theory anyway, which seems to have been verified quite a bit. And you could say that sort of behavior is going on not merely in us and in our body, but it seems to be fundamental to the whole of life as we know it. Now the virus particle comes in, it's another bit of DNA surrounded by some coating, which makes it difficult to recognize. And and then it gets in there and starts to act instead of the DNA of the cell, so that the cell starts to make virus particles instead of more cells, or instead of maintaining the cell. And therefore, the whole thing goes wrong, right? You see, so the disease consists, you could say, of misinformation in the virus, right? It's part of the soma, that's signosomatic, you see. Now there's soma-significance because, at that level, because the immune system has all sorts of complex things going on in there, which I can't even remember, which usually can recognize these virus particles and dissolve them or do something to them, right? Precipitate them, make them inactive, right? So, see, the soma of the virus particle is significant to the immune system, and the immune system acts signosomatically on the virus particle to do something, right? But of course, the immune system can get confused, and instead it can attack the body cells, which you call autoimmunity, right? Very serious disease. So, so it seems that sort of thing is going on much more common. It's not just us, but it's rather going on in the whole of life. And I might propose that it's even going on beyond life, but in inanimate matter too. But that would take one can give arguments in favor of that sort of thing. Now, so that we could say this soma-significant and signosomatic is the way by which the world is, by which the whole process is organized, right? Now, therefore, it's not to make a division between us and the world, but we're all taking part in a similar process. Now, and you could now make an analogy to the psychological or problems of the individual and the problems of society as due to misinformation. Now, you see, if a person has absorbed a number of assumptions which are of very high meaning, then he will act that way, and he will start, his whole behavior is misinformed, just as a cell has been misinformed to produce virus particles, or to produce, or something goes wrong with the cell, the DNA of the cell, so it produces cancer cells instead of normal cells, right? Now, similarly, in the mind, you see, we could say something, there's a kind of misinformation, or call it disease, if you like, which is communicable. Therefore, we can see now in society, we can communicate things that are right, and are helpful, and we can also communicate misinformation. Now, this misinformation, when it gets at this level, is very serious, right? You can't so easily correct it. That's clear, isn't it? So, it's misinformation, what I call the generative process. You see, the DNA information enters the generative process of the whole cell, right? And similarly, there's a generative process of the mind, the deeper levels. Misinformation coming in there will disorganize the mind of the individual, but it will disorganize the society. And you could say, it's no use trying to deal with this unless you can get at the real cause, right, at the real root. We generally try to deal with it way down the line. You see it from the symptoms, which are really products of this generative process. Now, meaning has to do with the generative process, you see. You see, you could say, in some sense, the immune system, the cells there, or whatever they are able to recognize a virus particle. It's very similar to what we say. We recognize something dangerous, right? It means something, right? And an action follows. I say a disposition follows, right?
It appears we've built a society that's living on things that's dangerous.
And what?
That is, we have built a society that is sustaining itself on the things that are dangerous.
Yes, it's misinformation, dangerous misinformation. You see, operating in the generative process, which is not very conscious, right?
Are you saying that disposition is dangerous?
That particular one, yeah. You see, for example, the cell may be disposed, once the virus particle enters, the cell is now disposed to produce more virus particles rather than whatever the cell needs, right? The cell will die, the other virus particles go out and do the same, and so on. See, if you get ill with the virus, the virus particles that come into you can do you no harm. There are only a few of them. But your body just simply acts as a feeding ground for virus particles and spreading the misinformation, right?
You say it's doing what it's supposed to do, just like the brain is doing what it's supposed to do, working with an idea.
Right.
I mean, it's in the cell is doing what
It's doing what it has to do. The virus particle is informing it to make virus particles. You see. Yeah, the brain is being informed to make nationalism or whatever. You see.
There's, in the body, there is some kind of intelligence or order that either it operates and wipes out this virus, or it doesn't operate and the organism dies.
That's true. Or else it even goes worse. It attacks the body when there are no virus particles sometimes.
So in the brain, there must be that same thing, but it's not operating.
Not visibly anyway.
That is the point that it's doing, overcoming the virus.
Yeah, you see, we could say that is the principal problem one of the principal problems humanity has always had, which is now very serious because this misinformation. See, the mixture of correct and wrong information is very dangerous. The correct information about uranium and so on to produce hydrogen bombs, and the misinformation about nationalism to make sure will tend to make them to dispose people to use them, right? You see, so the point is that also happens in the body. You see, the more correctly it works in some ways, the more dangerous it is when the misinformation. You see, in the case, some kinds of cancers, for example, will misinform the body to produce blood cells to feed the cancer, you see. So the more efficient the body is at feeding the ordinary cells, the more efficiently it can feed cancer cells. And say young people, therefore, die of cancer faster than old, right, as a rule, because of the vigor, the greater vigor.
In nature, there's usually a purpose
Right.
for a bacteria or whatever, and the same with virus. Can we assume that there's a purpose and a reason in nature for a virus?
Well, there may or may not be. I don't know if anybody knows it. You see, the virus, according to present scientific ideas, which obviously are very limited, the virus just developed, as one of the possibilities of life, right? Now, probably many viruses are beneficial or useful or harmless. Many bacteria we absolutely have to have, you see. So now somewhere in the relation between them, it doesn't work, right?
But in the body, the immune system's actions and the actions of the virus are mechanical actions.
That's an assumption which many people have made, but we're not sure of that. Huh? You see, that we have to distinguish between the assumptions that scientists are making and what may be the case. You see, that is an assumption which is common in science now, that everything works by mechanism. That may not be true. You see, it may be only correct up to a point. Now, for example, the immune system can be affected by people's thoughts and feelings. And it's well known that people who may have incurable diseases sometimes can be highly affected by, to have a recovery which would have seemed impossible, or vice versa. People who you would think are going to recover, if their state of mind is poor, they don't.
But then thoughts and feelings also, as you say, are also based on chemical.
Well, I don't say they're based that way. You see, I'm saying that they are that way, but there may be something still more subtle. You see, that's floating in another context and in another one.
Yeah.
And therefore, we don't know that the whole thing is mechanical. You see, we know that certain aspects can be isolated as mechanical.
So what is the limit of the mechanism?
We don't know. You see, I'm proposing that eventually it's not a mechanism, that it's a whole. But that it may be various parts can be relatively mechanical, having relative independence, you see. But the thing as a whole may not be mechanical. Now, but it would be a mistake if that were the case to assume that it is mechanical.
Well, what would be the brain's immunization system?
Well, that's what we have to explore. See, I'm saying society and the individual lack something analogous to the immune system of the body. Perhaps they have it, but it has gone wrong. Huh? See, what I would say the most evident feature of the immune system is if you see something false, it goes, right? See, every one of these pieces of misinformation is something false, right? but we don't see that to be false. The same problem arises with the body's immune system. If the cell or bacterium, the virus can be recognized by the immune system, it can be dealt with. But the trouble is that many of these viruses are very clever, and they undergo mutations that make them unrecognizable. You see, you have learned to recognize certain viruses, right? Influenza. A slight change, they make a slight change, and you no longer recognize them. So now they seem like harmless proteins, you see. Therefore, you sort of let them go.
Is there not also a difficulty in the sense that what you are suggesting is that there's a very basic disposition, that kind of cultural conditioning that goes back so far and is of such a vast extent that in itself will affect and distort even that system of cognition and perception that presumably is able to immunize those harmful...
I'm proposing that it has in fact done so, but that's not necessarily the end of the case, because every meaning is immersed, we were saying, in a still greater context, which is more subtle. And therefore, if that can be brought into action or awakened, maybe something new can happen. You see, if we stick to this range of meanings that we are used to, I'm saying, in fact, it has happened, just what you said. But maybe there's more, you see. You see, if we assume there's no more, then that will be a self-fulfilling assumption.
Of course, then we would be at an end.
So for the sake, at least, of proper scientific attitude, we say we shouldn't assume that. We should propose various possibilities and explore them. You see, that's the only sensible thing to do.
How does entropy relate to meaning?
Well, people have tried to find relations to it. You see, that's a more technical question. You see, some people have recreated entropy with the negative of information, but I think it's a rather technical question and has not really been settled in science anyway, so I'm not sure it would help us to discuss it.
It's almost as if meaning is like you use the idea of a stream that's constantly changing and isn't fixed at any one moment. But it's constantly changing according to what society, all the input in society and the changes that are going on.
And also what people see in nature and everything that happens, right?
Right, and as long as you're working in, as long as you are in there and part of that, you're going to be buffeted around by all the misinformation or correct information. And it was there's a sort of an implication here that there might be a possibility of not being in that stream.
Yeah, I'm suggesting, certainly we have been generally in that stream, but if we assume that that's all there is, then that will be a self-fulfilling assumption.
Yes.
Therefore, for the sake of, I mean, in science, in any reasonable approach, we shouldn't make such assumption. If it's unknown, then we don't assume something that will close the issue, but rather propose that it may be otherwise.
Maybe another possibility if, but the way it is right now, we're unaware that there's something that might be else.
Yeah, but we're not aware that there isn't something either, you see. You see, as we don't know. So therefore, the right attitude in the face of the unknown is to be open, you see. Now, that's a disposition again. You see, that's, you can be disposed to be open to the unknown, or you can be disposed to close off, right? If you say that what we know is all there is, you're disposed right away to close off, right? If you say, well, what we know may not be all there is, then you can be open.
It would almost seem like as soon as there is a fixed meaning, at some level it will be erroneous.
If it's absolutely fixed, right? You see, that perhaps I could say a few words about necessity now. You see, we're saying if something is absolutely fixed, it's necessary. You see, if something is always so, then it's necessarily so. You see, necessary means it cannot be otherwise, right? Now, absolutely necessary means that there's no way out. If it's relatively necessary, it's going to be that way, but it may be, perhaps it could be otherwise. But at least relatively it can't. Now, the word necessary also has a root in Latin, which is necessi, which means don't yield. So the disposition in the concept of necessity is don't yield, right? Be rigid. Hold, right? That's necessary, that's useful sometimes, saying hold, right? But if you say hold absolutely, no matter what happens, then it is trouble, right? So, see, absolute necessity would mean it has the danger of absolute rigidity of the attitude or the disposition.
Do we fix meanings because we have found them or find them to be protective at some point or originally? And
Yes,
then they
well,
continue beyond their usefulness because we think somehow that they're going to continue maintaining a protective function in our lives?
yes, well, we may think that certain things are necessary for our security, perhaps correctly, and then we begin to think that they're absolutely necessary, and that as to how we slip over into that, we'd have to go into, saying that it cannot be otherwise, no matter what happens, right? And therefore, your mind won't yield on that point, right? You see, then it becomes misinformation. You see, what was correct information in the earlier context becomes misinformation in the new context.
It seems all these things going on that are not in general awareness, that what has to happen is somehow there has to be an awareness of this. Is that
Yeah.
the issue?
Yes, let's try to put it. We've discussed this process of meaning, right? Signosomatic, soma-significant, physical, mental. And this process is not aware of itself, you see. It's only aware of a certain content, right? Like, you see, if I consider this chair, I have meaning about the chair as a process going on in me, which is fairly distinct from the chair itself, right? It may be correct, it may be incorrect, or both. Now, then, suppose you form the meaning, but you see, we formed the word meaning, the meaning of this process, the meaning of that, the meaning of that, and now we formed the word meaning, right? So it's just as every word has a meaning, so the word meaning must have a meaning, right? But what does the word meaning mean? Now, if we say the meaning of the chair is some actuality which to which this meaning refers, right? That we can come in contact with. So the meaning of meaning would have to be ultimately some actuality that that the word meaning would mean.
Isn't that tautology?
What?
Isn't that tautology?
Not necessarily, because we're using it at different levels, you see. You see, the meaning is a process. Meaning, we ordinarily don't consider that meaning is an actual process.
We look at it as a fact, as a fixed situation.
Well, also as something mental and ethereal, not really actual. We'd say meaning is not considered to be an actuality or a fact, right?
But we look at it as fixed rather than as a process.
That's one thing, but we don't even consider it to be an actual fact.
But we act on our meanings all the time as if they were real.
Yes,
Create
but
wars and
but
out of our meaning.
we consider our meanings to refer to something else that is real, but that they themselves are not real.
Meanings are a symbol for reality.
Yeah, they are a symbol, but we say that's all they are.
Right. But you're saying that they're actually have all this. They're they create us.
Yes, they are really very active as a process. They are an actual fact.
And is not the fact that it's so difficult to see the action of meaning, that it is so pervasive and so subtle, and because you described it the way you described it before, that meaning operates on a very large scale, and it touches everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's very comprehensive, very pervasive, but because it acts in such a fine and subtle way, it seems to be extremely difficult to see and discover.
Yes, that's the point, that we're facing this fact that we have found it difficult to say what we mean by meaning. You see, what do I mean by the chair? Ultimately, I can point to and say, this is what I mean by the chair, right? I can.
It's almost as if what we say is real is actually, what we call real is our meaning.
Yes, but but not only that, but it is actually real and created by us, by our meaning.
The only reality we know is our meaning.
Yes, but also a lot of it, yes, we want to say that we must be immersed in a greater reality, which is not just our own meaning, but at least a great deal of our individual and social reality is produced by what it means to us.
If there is a greater reality, we know nothing of it.
Well, we may know very little of it. You see, not clear whether we know nothing. You see, that might be an assumption. Right?
But what I meant is for what he said, that I experience my meaning
Yes.
as reality.
That's right. Well, reality is a meaning. You see, the distinction between reality and unreality is a meaning, and we have to go into that, the creation of illusion, right? So, yeah.
If I put it this way, do you agree now? I see and my meaning both are the same. And seeing is action. And this way, being and meaning are the same, right?
Ultimately. But there's a relative distinction at the ordinary level, saying the being of the chair is different from what the chair means to me, right? Because I don't know all about the chair, you know. I have an abstraction of it, but when it comes to the mind, to the human being, then being is clearly not separable from meaning, even in that sense, right?
Yeah, it's the event of being.
Mm-hmm.
This event of
Meaning. Yes, especially for the human life, right?
Dave, one problem I have is that I go back to your metaphor of the cell and virus. When the virus attacks the cell, the moment it actually enters the cell and begins turning off the genes and turning on the genes, the cell is no longer somaticizing, it is dead. And it has become a virus, so it has radically changed.
Well, I don't think it's right away dead. You see, the cell is active enough to produce more virus, you see, so in some sense it's still alive, you see.
It's a virus.
Yes, but it's alive. It's alive as...
Has been turned off that originally was that cell, and it's now just the DNA of a virus.
Yes, but that virus is alive too in some sense. You see, the life has been transformed from the life of a cell to the life of a virus.
But my point is that in that case, using that as a metaphor, and I know all metaphors are kind of...
Well, they're limited.
Limited, right? But it seems like in the case of a human, we have this experience. It may be undifferentiated in general, but out of that we give meaning to many of these various actions that take place. And I don't think we're transformed, or we're changed in the same sense that that cell is changed by that virus.
Well, we may be, you see, that we are changed more than we think. You see, for example, the information, Deutschland, Liberales, worked a profound change in people and made them capable of doing things they would not have been able to do without that misinformation. See, eventually it produced people who could run concentration camps, though as children you couldn't imagine they were anything like that.
So when you're saying meaning is real, is that an actual? That is meaning as a process, and not meaning as something fixed.
That's our meaning as an actual process. Meaning as not only as a process, that's correct. I want to emphasize it is an actuality.
But the actuality is a process.
Yeah, that's right. It is
not something fixed.
It is an actual process, just like the water running in the stream. Right?
It's different from the experience to which it's assigned.
No, you see, we'll discuss that maybe next time, the relation between symbol and meaning, right? You see, because there's a certain difference which is useful but limited, right? We have to go into that. So maybe we should have one more question, because it's about time to have our break. Who shall I... Who's the most insistent? Or do people all yield to each other?
Is somebody else speaking?
Okay, go ahead.
Hearing, so chair takes on a new meaning for me. In other words, so doesn't meaning meaning really has a lot to do with the function of that particular object. In other words, that's what we call a functional type of thing for the individual that wants a certain chair for a certain thing, an office chair or that. So meaning a chair broadens out to a functional situation where I would like a chair where I can hear, see? So my attitude about a chair becomes my need. My need also becomes the need for the chair. In other words, it interchanges. So how the meaning we put on it has how we use it as function.
Well, that's part of the meaning is function, but you see, part of the meaning goes beyond function. For example, the value which makes something worth doing at all, right? You see, you cannot reduce the whole of life to function because then it would have no value, right? All function is ultimately in the light of some value beyond function. And
I perchance viewed a television story which was a true story, and this involves meaning, perception, assumption, and conditioning. The story of a baby that was born in a mental institution. The mother rejected it. It was a private institution. The child grew up was normal in an institution, became mentally retarded with physical conditioning where it was like had a stroke, couldn't speak, and was taken into a psychiatric conditioning situation and was brought out of this. And it was the most amazing story where the child was almost like an animal, began to function, couldn't even speak, and came back to near normalcy. And I thought this was an excellent example of these conditions that you're speaking of.
yes, I mean, that's certainly true, that even with animals deprived of contact with some mother or mother substitute, they don't develop at all. And it's that meaning which allows for physical development. I think we should call a halt now for half an hour approximately. And, as that's right, isn't it?
But we were going to go from 10 to 12?
No, wait, I thought, maybe I was wrong. Did you plan refreshments in the middle? Or? No, well then I got it mistaken. All right, then let's go ahead.
We can just take a 10 or 5 or 10 minutes.
I think it's better to have a little break, Marcel. Let's say by 11:15 or approximately, right?